bring myself on screen. Got to pin myself again. There we go. It's pin. There we are. I'm on now. Right. Okay. Right. So as promised, we are doing a bit of collage this week. We're going to be looking at landscapes as we have been before. What I've done previous to the lesson, and you might have seen it online, is on the website, that I prepared I did a video on how to make some papers to collage with. Obviously we can also use, when we've people have been mentioning this before we started, that you can use magazines and all sorts of things that you can find lying around, things that come through the door with lots of different colours and things on. I'm sticking with black and white at the moment, although I am adding some, I have got some colour sheets that I've also prepared. So if you wanted to use some of the sheets that I prepared, they're all online, and all you have to do is click on the file that's on the website, and it will, and then you can download it and of course print them off. So I'll show you those in a few seconds. But the idea is that we're going to experiment with collage, and I'm going to be looking at some of the rocky landscapes and some other sorts of landscapes that that I've also posted on the website for you, should you want to download and use one of those as well. Okay, so the first part of it is we're going to transfer the outline of the picture. So you've got kind of a map or a way of placing down different shapes into the landscape to help you with that. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few things on here first of all, on the wall. Here we are on the wall then. So as you know, this is the sort of thing that I have done in the past here. So this is where we've collaged underneath, and then I've painted back over the top with acrylics, and then perhaps even worked back in with a bit of collage. And I've talked about that in previous lessons. So we're kind of heading in that direction. And indeed, in previous classes, I have done stuff a little bit like that as well. And then we've also, last week, we looked at some of these kinds of rocky landscapes, because the pictures have a really good central focus, which means that even if your collaged areas are a little bit abstract, you've still got something that draws the eye and gives you a sense of place and movement as well, when we look at things like the clouds, so the directional lines of the clouds and things. And you can use collage textures. I think Mary just mentioned that she had a bit of a pie cover on a photograph of the cover of a pie that she could use inside of a landscape as well. So you can use all sorts of different textures and things that you've either made or you've collected to help you create a landscape. But a photo with a good focus point, such as this rock here, is really good to help the viewer, when they look at your picture, they can see exactly what they should be looking at directly, because some of the abstract qualities of these collages can be a bit overwhelming at times. So I've got two examples of the kinds of landscape, other kinds of landscapes here as well. So I'm just gonna, this one's by an artist called Susie Curio. There's one that I found on Pinterest. So it's a really lovely landscape here. We've got loads of texture, and indeed that's probably a large part of what we're looking at, is how to use textures within a landscape. But if you look in the bottom left hand corner here, you can see how the salt has been used on some inks or some watercolors, and we did that in a previous class before Christmas where we created some textures and things using salt. So she's obviously torn that piece of paper and applied it into her work, which is a lot of what I'm going to be doing in today's lesson. And then you've got blue papers in the middle there, the dark blue papers where it's been water has been splattered over the top to create different textures too. So that's the sort of thing that I'm focusing on mainly today. But of course you can use magazines in there and things like that as well. And then the next one is just a different style of portrait of landscape. So let's see if I can get that to the top. There we go. So this one is with a lot of plain papers. I think the artist prepares these papers or prints them off first of all, but you've got much more cut with a pair of scissors, angular sorts of shapes that have been applied to create the landscape. And the thing that works really well on this is the fact that you've got good tone and shadow. You've got a good focal point, which is obviously the tree here. And then you've got the really dark areas on one side of the tree and the lighter greens on the left hand side of the tree. And then the lovely shadow as well. And the patterns and textures have also been repeated in the shadow as well as in the grassy sort of area in the foreground there. So there's another approach. So there's a few approaches you can do, ripping and tearing and things like that. So I'll just pop that one back over there. And then the last one is an artist that I really like called Mike Bernard or Bernard, depending on how you want to say it, I suppose. And he, oh, let's get that in the front. It's called Sheep in Snow, this one. And what I like about this is it is collage, but also we've got other mediums coming in there as well. So we've got a bit of paint in there and things, but you can see if we look really close how there you can clearly see there's collage and different materials underneath, but then the paint has been applied on the top, which is where we're kind of where I'm hoping we can head in the next few weeks as well. So let's just make him a bit smaller again, all the little sheep. All right, so I did a collage last night, so I'm going to show you that on the desk now. There we go to the desk. So I register away. So we're looking for a landscape that has got good tone and shadow, because that's going to help you pick out the different shapes within your landscape as well as all of the textures. I'm going to have a go at doing this one, and I did a similar one last night as well. These are the prepared papers that I did at the weekend. I did this one last night actually, but you can actually make your own colours. And the nice thing about doing this, I did this with acrylic paint, you can do it with watercolour if you want to as well. The nice thing about, I'm just going to switch me off because I'm a bit, I've got a bit more room there. So the nice thing about doing the papers yourself is that you get all the streaks and the lines that appear on the surface there as well, and they're really great to collage with because you can get kind of directional brush strokes going in there. And that's what I did at the weekend with all of the sheets that you can also download. So first of all, we've got a tonal range here, which is brilliant for the sky. So this was just using the inks and adding a bit of water to make a graduated piece of paper. And over here, we've got things like using Parker Quink ink and a sponge. So this was a case of dabbing the sponge to create these lines. Here I used brushes and I did little stipples. Over here I just moved it around quite erratically, and then I've used a bit of bleach because bleach works really well with ink too. And here I'm just dragging, oh, I used a fan brush as well, which is one of these, a fan brush, to create lines. And all of these things can be used in a landscape, and this is quite a nice one too. If you imagine that being on a field with little stipples on there with the side of my brush. Here that was splattered bleach, and on here I used candle wax to create, just to put some lines down and put the ink on top, so the water obviously resists the wax and you get the lines coming through. So once you get started doing this sort of thing, it's actually really good fun because you always come up with more ideas when you're doing this sort of thing. So this was just literally dragging this sponge over the surface to create these lines which can be used. And then I've done all sorts of other things like printing with tissue paper, repeating lines on top of each other, doing scribbles. So I had quite a bit of fun trying out all of those. And what I did then is I photographed them all so that you can download them should you want to use them today. So here I've got the collage that I did. And we'll start off in a few seconds. So basically you can print all these off, and I used these last night, the printed off ones, to do the collage that I did. So you can print those off on the website if you want to use those, or if you want to make your own today, even better, but it is good fun, and then do the collage later. So this is the landscape that I did last night, and I had a lot of fun doing this. I worked really quickly so that I didn't spend too much time thinking about it, but whilst I was working I was focusing on the fact that I wanted A, the texture, and B, the tone and shadow to show the shape and the form of the subject. And I've got a good focal point here in the sky, and I've got good dark shadows in the rocks and stuff too. So I created quite a nice landscape. This was the tonal range in the sky, and it's got all these lovely sort of blotted areas. I'll just come in a little bit closer. I have got a scanned version of it actually. Just bring that over so you can see a bit closer. There we go. So here, look, I use small strips of paper collaged, and here in the background you can see all these lovely blurred bits of ink, and then I got a slightly darker bit and just tore it and put it over the top. So I'm putting in and inventing little features in the landscape as well. So these lines towards the back here, just under the tree, those lines, they're not actually in the real landscape, but I thought it would look nice, so I did that too. And then as we go further down, I've got this sort of how do you describe it, sort of sanded, sort of stony texture on here, and for the highlights I use the scribbled wax resist. And then I use directional lines again to show the movement of the rocks going up the side of this rocky sort of area. So I'll just bring that down again. Just bring it in. There we go. So overall, once that's all done, you get a really lovely textural landscape with lots of interesting detail, and at the same time you're being creative and inventive as well. All right, so I'm sticking with black and white at the moment, but in the future we will of course be doing color. But if you want to go in straight away and do a bit of color, absolutely no problem with that. Just have a bit of fun being creative and inventive with this technique. All right, so how to get started. So this is how I got started yesterday. So we're going to just create an outline really, and then you know where all those bits go straight away without having to spend ages drawing it out. Just a really quick way of doing it. Some of you might have seen me use this before. In fact, a lot of you will. This is carbon paper. Now I know that a lot of people won't have a piece of carbon paper, especially maybe A4 size. But basically carbon paper is inky paper. One side doesn't transfer, the other side does. And you just put the paper down on the surface underneath the photo, face down, and then you can just draw over the photograph itself, and your marks will transfer on to the surface of the paper, and then you've got an outline. Now I know that most people won't have that, so the alternative is literally to scribble on the back with a graphite pencil. So this is what I did last night. You don't need tons on there, but just covering the surface. So I've just added some more basically on there. And then what you can do is you can tape it down so it doesn't move about. I won't do that now. But then what you can do, of course, is you can do exactly the same process. Draw over your photo and you will get the lines transferred on there, which you can just about see. It doesn't come out as dark as graphite, but it's just as effective because it means you know where you're going to put that shape or whatever. So if, for example, I've drawn out, let's draw out this shape here, this big rock along here. I am going to do this landscape in a minute. So I've got that shape there and I've drawn it out. So if I put a bit of shadow, you can just about see where that is. Now I'm gonna, let's say I've got my collage paper and I want to get that shape exactly as I drew it. I can go back over my photo like that and I can see now where to cut that out. You can use scissors. I prefer to use a scalpel blade like this, because that's what I normally use. Scissors are just as effective, of course, but sometimes you can get just a bit more detail or smaller, more trickier bits. Using a scalpel blade is quite useful, but if you haven't got one, you can use scissors. So there you go. So I can then match that shape up to the one that I've just traced out from my photo. So the real creative bit of all of this is using the textures and patterns with the tone and shadow in there, and then you can be, you can be creative with those without having to worry about where everything goes straight away. All right. So first stage is to trace out your picture, okay, using the graphite, or if you've got some carbon paper. If we were together, I'd give you a sheet of this. Trace out your picture, and then following that, what you need to do is start tracing out the individual shapes you want to go in there. So if you're using a magazine, it's just the same process. And then later on, what I did with my one is I was adding extra things like doing a bit of tearing and a bit of layering a couple of extra shapes on the surface as well. So on my picture here, I zoom into that again, focus it. I kind of had, yeah, go on.
What type of paper have you used?
What type of paper did you say? Yeah.
Yeah.
The paper I've got here that I've printed out on is just photocopy paper or printer paper. So it's quite thin. And that's quite good for cutting out detail and things like that. So this is just stuff you put in your printer. But the paper that I use to do all my ideas on, for the papers, was done on cartridge paper, and then I photographed it with my phone, and then printed them out from the computer. That makes sense? Okay. All right.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Jamie, what are you collaging onto?
That is cartridge paper. So that's normal paper.
I've got watercolour paper taken.
Yeah. In fact, watercolour paper might be a little bit better than cartridge because it's a little bit thicker. Only because when you apply a lot of glue, it ends up rippling a bit. But I kind of like that quality. It feels like, it goes all stiff and stuff when it's dry. The glue that I'm using is PVA glue. So I've got this big jar of it that I've poured out, and I get my PVA from B&Q in a massive tub for £12, because I use a lot of PVA glue in my work. As you know, I do a lot of collage work myself, so PVA is really useful to have around. And then to apply the PVA, I just use a normal brush. So I'm going to trace out my drawing now, and then I'll show you how I put the paper on and things. But just as a general sort of tip, what I don't do is, if I cut out a piece of paper like this and I want to stick it down, I don't glue the back of this. I glue the surface, the whole area that I want to glue in, rather than glue the little tiny bits of paper, because that tends to be a bit more messy. And it's a bit better, because what I do is I'll do a bit on here actually, now, so you can see. I suppose the messiest part of this, if you're thinking, oh, mess, the messiest part of it is you get a little bit of glue on your fingers. So what I tend to do is I'll put the glue just in the area on the surface of the paper that I'd like to put this piece of paper, like that, and then I brush back over the top of it. So you don't need to put, if you're using PVA, you don't need loads of PVA, so don't flood it. Just put it on the surface quite thinly, and it will glue, because PVA is for gluing paper down. So it works really well with with small amounts of things. And then I'll use the scalpel blade as well to cut thinner bits sometimes too. So often use a knife, and if I'm doing details like I did on that tree that are really small, I'll cut really thin pieces. Of course you can do that with a pair of scissors as well. So like on the tree here, there's some really small details that I wanted to do as a stipple, so that means just dots. So this is how I did it. I just put glue on the surface like that, and then I used my little knife, and I just put the knife, I have the paper in my hand like this as a strip, and then I'll just put the knife on the surface and pull it off like that. And that means I've got a glued surface, so I don't need any glue at this point. I can just stipple, and I use this. It's like drawing with a line, which sounds a bit funny actually, but drawing with, so I've cut a line out and I'm going to draw with the line. So I'll just show you what else I do sometimes. So if I've got some glue on the surface, I can also make this line of paper go in different directions like this by using my scalpel, just to keep it where I want it as I go. So I can make a wavy line like that if I wanted to too, like that. Okay, so there's all sorts of little things you can do, and to be honest, you'll probably discover ways of working yourself. I like ripping and tearing and cutting little bits out, and I love doing detail on trees and things as well, because that's when I get sort of absorbed in what I'm doing. The other thing I really like to do is tear paper as well. So if I take a piece of this, just come out a bit more. So I like to pinch out really thin bits of paper as well with my nails, or just the ends of fingers, and then you can get these lovely torn edges that you can then put down and draw with too. So in a sense, we're drawing with the paper. All right, so does that give everyone a good idea of how to get started if you've not started already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jamie?
Yeah.
One tip somebody told me was,
Yeah.
when you're putting down the sort of the larger pieces,
Yeah.
if you use a bit of glue tack on the back before you
Yeah.
stick it, just offer it up and stick a little bit of glue tack on
Yeah.
your piece of collage,
Yeah.
and then you can sort of put it in the places you want it, and then you can see where to stick it.
Yeah.
Found that quite helpful.
Yeah. Yeah,
Especially when you sneeze or the wind
Uh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Some artists really like to work. They like to put all the pieces of paper on the surface of the picture plane first, so that things can be adjusted and moved around as they're working. I always have a specific idea about, because what I do pre-painting or pre-collage is I plan exactly where everything's going to go, so I already know what's going where in a sense, until the end part. So I'll show you how I plan it in a bit. But I'm working from scratch in a sense, so I have a plan about where exactly things, like I did a painting of a badger recently. I'll show you it actually. I've got it here. So I did this collage of a badger, and I knew what size and where the badger was going to go. And then after that, I created the background a bit more kind of loosely. I knew I wanted something up here as well, this bird. So because I knew exactly where I wanted things to go, I didn't need to blue tack things down because I knew exactly what I was doing. But certainly,
You're clever.
thank you. But certainly, it is useful to not stick everything down straight away in a way, because it allows you to be have a bit more freedom making decisions and things as well. So, and I have done that a few times, just placed things and thought, oh, well, that's quite nice, and it looks a bit more spontaneous and quirky at the same time. Whereas I like to work like that with the badger.
Well, I find if I've got lots of bits of magazine,
Yeah.
I can try different bits in different places to see.
Yeah, exactly.
Colours and things.
And that's a really good way of working too.
Yeah.
But as I said, you find your own personal approaches to things, and that's just as valid as me telling you how to do stuff. Okay.
Yeah. Could you also just tell me who the artist was? Susie somebody.
Susie Curio. So that's Curio.
Lovely.
Now her first name is spelt a little bit unusually, so I will just tell you. It's Suzsi. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. It's quite a nice artist.
And Jamie, sorry.
Yep.
Just one more question. You haven't put a wash behind your collage at all, have you?
No, I didn't use anything like that. So the sky is made from one of the textures that I produced at the weekend. So I'll show you that one, if I've not already torn it all up. So these are all so this is what I used, one of these. I've got two versions of that, one of which was quite nice. Oh, there it is. So I've got, yeah, that actually, I think that was the one that I used, because it's got these marks across here. So I made these first of all, which you can, if you want to use them, print them off, and then collage that on first. And you'll see this in the video, because I've made a video of this too. But yeah, I collaged the whole of the sky in as one piece, and then I added bits on top, and then I put the tree over it. So it is a case of layering, really, over the top. And if you cover any of your lines over that you made initially, you can put them back in again on the background that you've made.
Right, okay, so this is actually the second of the two landscapes that I made for this lesson. So this is the one that I made on the first day, which I'm just talking about briefly, I think. And then I start making a new one on the Tuesday, which is this landscape just here. So the first thing to do is to get all the basic outlines in the landscape to sort of create some sort of structure to the picture. So you can see me just using the carbon paper on the back of my photo, and then I've got the whole thing translated onto the surface of the cartridge paper straight away. So what I'm using here is one of my printed sheets that I did on Saturday. There's a video on that on the website if you want to see it. So basically I created a series of inked tonal backgrounds, and I'm just adding some lighter areas onto the bottom of the tonal ground that I put there, so that we've got some contrast between the tree when I put that in a short while. And then there was a hill towards the back which was a bit darker, and then this bit is actually going to be some of the rocks in the distance, and I really like these horizontal lines that you can see in there, which create a sense of movement. And then I'm putting down some of the wax resist sort of grainy textures in small as rocks in the background there as well. So I'm working from the back of the picture forwards, and that's so that the paper gets layered in the different sections. So you've got the background, the midground and the foreground, which is closest to us. Okay, so I think I just nipped out for a second just here. So what I do next is I got myself some darker paper, some black paper. I did actually print it off as well. The nice thing about printing or scanning your textures that you create to collage with is that you can print them out, especially if they're in black and white. Most people have black and white printers, so it's easier. But I've got colour one, so I could do that too. But here you can see me, I'm just cutting out the overall sort of silhouette, the shape of the tree feature in the background. And I do just literally stick this silhouette down on the surface, but then later on I come back and I work into some of the details a bit more later. As you can see, it looks a bit stark at the moment, and it is a stark tree, but there are some more details which can be placed in there. I could probably have spent a bit more time on that, but my purpose for this particular lesson was to get through the whole thing in a lesson and to force myself to work quicker, because it allows you to sort of work with a little bit more freedom, a bit more looseness, a bit more flow and so forth. So at the moment what I decided what I'm doing here is I'm adding all of the darkest tones around all of these jagged sort of rocks, and they've got a kind of direction that goes off diagonally from the bottom left up to the mid sort of right area of the landscape. So you've got this kind of diagonal line of movement which creates this dynamic feel in the picture as well, or in the photograph even. So carrying on adding these shapes, and what I'm doing here is I'm using the carbon paper and the photograph to get the shapes originally, but then after that I start to apply them quite loosely by ripping paper. Now I'm adding the mid-tones into the rocks in the foreground. So I've got this sort of scribbly stuff as well for lighter highlights. So they're not really white, but they add a little bit of contrast between the dark shadows that I put in with carbon paper originally, the mid-tones, and then the scribbly light tones. Sometimes it's useful just to put over a large area of scribbly bits or texture into the picture, so you can then work on with layers afterwards rather than just trying to fill up a space. You put down larger bits. So now I'm just putting in a few lineal sort of textures towards the back, just because I can try out some different techniques really. I've got all these different textures, so I'm just experimenting a little bit. One of the things you'll find if you've got some textures on paper, if you tear them and arrange them in different directions and things, you can create some really interesting alternative ideas and results. So working quite quickly, as you can see, putting in, I know it's speeded up, but I'm looking here for highlights and shadows again. There we go. So overall, you know, I mean, it's not absolutely what I'm not trying to do is get exactly the same as the photo, but to get a sort of recognizable sort of tonal and shadow and texture sort of picture in here. So in other words, we're not trying to copy the picture, we're trying to create something new that is representative of the subject, which is the photo. A lot of fun doing this, especially at speed, because you can see things rapidly emerging. When I normally do a collage, it takes me quite a few hours to do bits of detail, especially like if I'm doing animals or specific features that I want the eye to be drawn to. Whereas this has got a nice clear tree silhouette in it, and these lovely rocks with bigger sort of areas of detail in the front, and then smaller scaled down rocks towards the background, as you'd see in a normal landscape. So this is me just finishing off now and adding some more details into the trees. So there's a few highlights in the bushy branchy bit at the top, and then I sort of work around the edges, adding finer details into the branches as well. There we go. So here I'm just cutting really thin strips using my scalpel blade. My scalpel blade is brilliant because what you can do is you can make small stipples, which is little dots, and you can also just move little bits around if you're not quite happy with them as well. And then I put that little cloud, dark cloud, on the horizon there as well. So overall I've got quite a nice shape with that one. So this is the one I did on Monday night, and again it's the same sort of picture really. It's a bit higher up in the landscape of course, but it has a very specific focal point. So here we are, putting in the sky again using some of the same material that I used in the last one I just talked about. Putting in the outline of the tree again on top, so that I know exactly where that tree is going to go. And here I'm just what I'm doing is getting again a silhouette of the main part of the branches. Not all of it, because some of the branches were actually a more pale monotone, a pale tone of grey. So I go back in a few minutes and put that in as well. So there we go. There's the weird sort of spidery shape of the branches. And then what I do is I use the other pictures, bit of the picture, and the sheet, and I start to collage in more of the branches. So this is something that I really enjoy doing because I like getting sort of stuck into the detail. I'd usually take a lot longer with this, but as I said before, I'm trying to sort of work really quickly. That's the sort of challenge with this in this lesson, is to produce a whole picture during that time, and so people can see the full range of the techniques that I'm using. So I'm using now more grey sort of tones. That's to add some like highlights on the tree trunk itself, but as you can see, putting in some of the branches towards the top there. It turns out that they're not quite dark enough because I've got quite a grey background here, so I could go back in with some more black sort of details as well, and lots of stippling to get that, to suggest that detail in there as well. Something I really enjoy doing is this detail, and it's a bit like, and I don't know if I said this before, it's where you cut out a long strip of material and then you start collaging with it. It's almost like using a 3D line and drawing with it on the surface of the paper. Because I know using the carbon paper to plan out where everything goes, or just to draw the outlines for everything, I know where everything's going to go. I know it's in the right place. and I can focus on using these textures and so forth to draw in those details. So here on the sky there, I thought it'd be fun just to use a bit of darker paper against the lighter areas to create a contrast and a bit more interest in the sky as well. So here now I'm doing pretty much what I did before, I think, which is just to add some of the shadowy areas in the picture. That big rock down the bottom there is already there because I was using that as a demonstration on that Monday evening. So that's the landscape. So I did use the carbon paper to get the exact shape of the land, the horizon down there. And I've used the horizontal wiggly sort of broken lines as an extra feature towards the back. And I'm starting to put ideas in for the rocks and things next. And again, it's similar to the other picture in that I've got this horizontal sort of, or sorry, diagonal line from the bottom right up to the left. So it's a similar, very similar composition in many senses of the word. So here we go. This is me stippling, putting in lots of detail here with different tones, and it's nice to have that variation in tone because the black on its own would be probably just a little bit too harsh. So whacking in those dots, adding a few extra bits in here and there as well. So we've got a nice sort of tree shape there with multiple tones. There we go then. So I use this sort of directional lines again to suggest that diagonal direction that I was just talking about. And here we go, getting in some of these shadows on the rocks themselves. And pausing to help someone. There we go, I'm back with the shadows now and the other rocks in the foreground. Again, tearing up these lines and overlapping them in different directions creates a completely different feel. It's almost like liquidy looking, that one, but it's the right sort of tone for that area. I think just now I'm adding a bit more tone underneath. Magic. There we go, a bit more black. There we go, some more shadows in there as well. You can see the shadow just about on the picture. And I thought I'd just fill up that whole area of rock with that shape, with a bit more of the tonal stuff that I used on the sky. And then I think after that I'll work back over the top of it. There we go. Collaging directional tone coming down the side of the rocky area. Bit of contrast as well. Something in the background. And then the rocks just towards the back there. Just sometimes the scribbles can be a bit too big, so I've just worked back over the top. Here I've turned the paper in circles to create these round sort of shapes, like rocky sort of patterns, which I've put on there. It's sort of come together a bit more now. adding again, you can see that I'm adding more layers. Even though I put that tonal area there, I'm layering back over the top, and I'm always looking at the photo that I'm working from. So whereas this is a very inventive process, it also relies on observation, looking at the picture that you're working from. And I just wanted to put a few more details in the fields down at the back without worrying too much about getting it totally accurate at that point. We talk about observation with this sort of thing. We're looking at tonal ranges and the general direction of lines and so forth. There we go. So all done.